And now I get to invite two other GMF colleagues up for our final session with the emerging leaders. So I'm going to ask Madeline Georg and Sophie Dembinski to come to the stage. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's great to have another opportunity to close the Atlantic Dialogues as we did last year. The Emerging Leaders Program is truly great, and I have to say it's probably one of the most exciting projects that I've worked on. We've grown over the past 3 years. We started in 2010 with a single session. We now have 2 days of programming with different sets of activities, and we're going to continue to deepen this programming in the coming years. We've also been able to play a larger role in sort of the Atlantic Dialogues proper, which is wonderful. We are joined by a group of great emerging leaders from around the entire Atlantic Basin, and this is a great session to share some of the experiences that they've had over the past few days.
That's true. So over the last 4 days, we've been working together across a variety of different activities. We've been doing brainstorming sessions, ideas, factories, site visits, and general discussions on the region as a whole. On one of our days, we actually did a brainstorming session that was going to link directly to this session now. And we brainstormed around 5 themes, 5 policy areas. So we broke the group into these 5 areas, and we came up with kind of ideas around these themes. Some of them will be projected later on behind us on these slides. But as well as that, we also have 5 representatives from the group who will be joining us on stage to go through the themes and convey their own reflections on the themes themselves, but also on Atlantic Dialogues as a whole. So without further ado, because we only have half an hour, let's bring them on stage.
I'm from Sweden. I'm a politician. I work daily in trying to help political parties in non-democratic countries to be better. I try to influence EU policymaking in a youth level of politics, and I take decisions every day that affects the citizens of Stockholm. My topic today is global leadership of the group that I'm representing. And I must say something to all of you. Global leadership is actually a little bit of old-fashioned. I know today there are some people who are Cold War enthusiasts that think that the situation with Russia and Ukraine is a bit of exciting because we're back in the 80s, but actually we're not. The world is changing, and it's changing rapidly. Why are we talking about the old-fashioned global South when we see that traditional North countries have a lack of economic growth, while the traditional of southern countries have an economic growth? If you talk about the South, it's a term that is very relative. Depending on who you ask that question is, you will get a different answer, right? And we see that new leaders are emerging. Other kind of leaders, like in NGOs, companies, civil society, and even individuals. And even teenage girls from Pakistan are global leaders. And even young guys sitting home in their parents' room and hanging at the computer, affecting millions of people out there, right? So we have to adopt to this, because we see that diplomats are spending their times in international institutions and having them as discussion clubs with our results, while other actors are being more innovative, having more participation among people. So why is this? The reason is because the international institution and the global leadership is not working. It's not transparent, it's not efficient, and it's not legitimizing. So people are getting frustrated and tired, actually. They want results. And the democratic deficit is a real challenge for everything we're doing. So what now? We have to, all of you who call yourselves global leaders have to lose the prestige. really act as political leaders with a political real will and reform these international regional institutions for them to be more compact but efficient and not big and not efficient at all. So now when you are going home after this beautiful conference, you have two choices. Either you close the book, you say that, oh, it was really nice to be here, got a new friends, new perspectives, new ideas, but you know, the world is still bad out there, you know? What can I do? Or you change the page to a new page, and you sit on that plane home, and you write down 3 concrete ideas on how you, on your field, either it's in political or business or whatever, you write 3 concrete ideas that actually can make an impact, and you try to affect other people to actually spread that word. Change and future and a better world is only change if one of us is actually making an impact. We cannot sit and wait for some person to come there and show us the way. It's all upon all of us, all individuals. So thanks.
Great. Great, thank you so much, Arba. Now, I actually didn't mention this at the beginning, but we only have half an hour. So we're only going to take 1 question per theme. So if anyone has a question now, raise your hand and we'll try and get you in for this one question. No?
No one dares?
Yeah? You have a question? Is there a mic around?
My question is, what idea will you bring with you? Because you are asking us to have 3 ideas.
Well, there's a lot of things we can do. I want to cut administratives in international institutions because they're not doing so much. For example, the UN. We say that the goal and mission of the UN is global security, right? But the UN is doing everything else but global security. We're doing all kinds of issues. So I would like to have the institutions much more compact as administrations, and for people who are in there and taking decisions are more accountable to their voters than they are today, because people don't know who actually rules and make decisions. So the closing the gap between citizens and decision making is crucial, but it's also a very modern thing to be close to your citizens. So that's something that I would like to work with if I had the responsibility to be in an international institution. Maybe people don't like that because it's a big change of an organization, but it's needed.
Great, thank you so much.
Qatar?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kautar Adhmani. I am from Morocco, and I work in emerging market investing in London. So our group was asked to talk about geoeconomics and geopolitics. It's a big topic. There are many things out there going on. So instead of just going through theoretical discussions about how we can solve big geopolitical issues, we have decided to select 3 topics which we thought will be of concerns in the years to come. So the first one is about data protection and cybersecurity. Beyond the Snowden scandal or the WikiLeaks or cyber attacks on some Pentagon database, we think that this is going to be a major issue in all countries around the Atlantic. And actually yesterday on the Power of Tech panel, there was a fantastic map describing live all the cyber attacks happening in the world, and we could see that it affected equally developing countries and more advanced economies. So what should we do about it? How to think about it? My friend Dulce, who was on the panel yesterday, mentioned some of these challenges. And for instance, just for the governments to go more toward e-government, many of us will be paying taxes online in the years to come. Many of us will be making payments online in the years to come. And so this is an issue that affects all of us, and we think that we lag behind in finding solutions, coordinated solutions to this issue. The second issue that we talked about was the management of natural resources. And we have seen in the past years, again, another cycle of very high volatility of commodity prices. Unfortunately, developing countries are more sensitive to this volatility. And we have to find a way of making it more sustainable and to make a more sustainable use of these resources. And actually, we can see that there's an increased ownership of many developing countries of their natural resource management. We can see, for instance, many new large state-owned companies taking into account this volatility, trying to invest in the industrial diversification of the economy, taking into account the environmental challenges that the natural resource management may pose. OCP in Morocco, for instance, is one of them. And our Brazilian friends who are voting for their presidents today certainly have been frontrunners in the invention of this new state capitalism. So the third issue that we also talked about was the management of transnational issues. And it can be, or conflicts. It can be wars, it can be maritime security and piracy or traffics, and it can also be major health issues such as the Ebola outbreak. In fact, one of the panelists yesterday was describing Ebola as a terrorism of poverty, and I think it's a very powerful expression. And unfortunately, here again, we found that there was no adequate coordinated action to address this, whether around the Atlantic or at an African scale or at an international scale. And actually, for us, it seemed like a good way to start thinking about Atlantic issues. Because frankly, when we came in to discuss about Atlantic dialogues and the Atlantic Basin, this is such a diverse group. This is such a large number of countries who sometimes may have difficulty to find anything in common. And so we thought that if we selected specific issues to start discussing on, to start building on, it might be a good way to start this Atlantic dialogues. Thank you.
Could we also take one question or one comment on the floor? Anyone? Yes, if you can. Great.
Yes, my name is Usman. I'm from Nigeria. I live in Germany. I don't know if you people discuss about the youths themselves, how nowadays they care about smartphone, new digital technology, Twitter, WhatsApp, rather than concentrating on knowing their right in their respective country. Because in most cases, you find the youth, they just react what they hear from the media, what they read from the social network without knowing whether it is reality or it is a political issues. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Actually, I remember Margot's very vocal intervention when we were discussing this, saying that it can be a fantastic opportunity, as we may have seen in some of the political developments in many regions of the world where the youth voice could be heard more easily through these new technologies. But on the other hand, sometimes there is a lack of awareness of just the confidentiality issues, for instance, that may arise, or the use of this information. And I think there's a lot to be done on awareness about this issue. Actually, we have a colleague in the Emerging Leaders program who works in a firm that works on training about data security, on cyber security, but also physical data security. So definitely. And I think in the educational systems as well, this is something that has become an important subject to address in the years to come.
Great, thank you. Andrea.
Thank you, Mokhtar. In fact, I have to start by seeking your apology. I never realized how difficult it would be sitting there and having 200 smart people look at us as if we have something important to say. But I'm going to quickly come back to the youth question. In my group, we had to talk a little bit about issues around resilient and sustainable economy, or in other words, sustainable economies and resilient. And that to me was a challenge. By the way, I'm Joya Tekum. I work with the UNDP, United Nations Development Program based in Addis Ababa. Sustainable economies. I think we can all agree that right now we are at the end of the very first industrial revolution. We see a decline in almost everything. We see a decline in the use of non-renewable fossil fuel. We see a decline in the use in manufacturing. At the subnational and national level, we even see a decline in the compassionate state of governance. Yet, at the global level, it is no doubt that we have three responsibilities, 3 or 4. We have to feed, we have to cure, we have to educate, and we have to transport 7 billion people. These are not my figures, they're out there. So this gives us huge responsibilities as a society, as a global society. And so for our group, what we really pondered on was how do we transform these transatlantic global sweet dialogue into making real change in people's life at the local level. But not just making change, making sustainable and resilient change. So we said perhaps there are 3 things we need to tell you guys to think about. The first one is governance. That in your interaction at that transatlantic level, you've got to talk about proper governance. This is something that really didn't come up throughout the discussions. We didn't talk about our need to engage with leaders across the continent on issues of governance. And by governance, let me just talk about 2 sub-clusters under governance. The first one is the issue of institution strengthening. So when we bring in money, in fact, those of you who know Dambisa Moyo, she said over the course of 50 years, $2 trillion has gone into Africa in the form of aid, foreign aid. My question is, did we manage to uplift 2 trillion people from poverty? Why didn't we, if we didn't? Governance. The framework we are operating under is one that supports individualistic governance. So we come in and we work with leaders, we work with individuals. I was so happy to hear the former Prime Minister of Senegal and the former President of Costa Rica talk about investing in people. So I would postulate that we need to focus on institutions when we get into these transatlantic discussions. The second thing is inclusion, and this is why I wanted to touch on your point on youth. You know, when I was in high school, they said I was a future leader. Then I went to the university. Now you are there, almost there, you're a future leader. I'm 34 today, they're still calling me an emerging leader. In a country whose lifespan, the life expectancy is not up to 54. So I don't know when I would eventually emerge. But anyway, the reason why I mention this is that it's critical to also engage on issues of inclusion. But not just inclusion of women, youth, but inclusion of women. In Africa today, women make up almost 51% of the workforce. They are a source to reckon with. But in discussions and dialogues, we always almost omit in bringing them into the discussion. So women and youth, they're always not there. They're there when maybe they want us to come and sit here and talk about a closing panel. And so what? Would you start involving us as leaders? Would you start considering us, not just as emerging leaders, but people who can help shape policies at the national level? The second thing, very quickly, after governance, the second thing is productive capacity. So when we do these transatlantic discussions and negotiations, we need to invest in human capital. And if anything, the discussions over the 4 days, I think the politicians actually were the ones who brought in the issue of human capital. It wasn't surprising that the private sector didn't talk about investing in human capital a lot, but it was, of course, the former PM and the former president of Costa Rica who buttressed the point of investing in human capital. You can bring in $50 billion over the course of 10 years. If there's no capacity at the national level to be able to transform that $50 billion in getting people out of poverty and bringing the equality line a little bit at the equilibrium, you're wasting your time. So as we engage with these countries, we have to think about how do we also engage in strengthening their capacity to improve the productive elements of the society. And very last point. So I talked about governance and productive capacity, but we also have to talk about renewable energy. It was quite interesting, the panel before, the last two panels, somebody said on the wall that none. They said, do you see any strength in using renewable energy? Somebody said no. You know, it made me thinking. I was reading one of these futuristic magazines, and the guy was saying that in 1860, the city of New York decided to invite a lot of smart folks to come and talk about the future of New York in 100 years. Smart people around the world. So they came, at the end of that discussion, they said, listen, New York, 100 years, dead. The city will not exist. And so people said, but why? They said, because, this is in 1860, because for New York to survive through the next 100 years, looking at the population curve, the growth rate, they will need 7 million horses to transport people around. And we all know that with 7 million horses, the entire city will be full of manure. So it will be difficult. But no, 40 years down the line, this is important, 40 years down the line, we had 1,001 car manufacturing plants in New York, in America, in Toledo, in Michigan, Ford, Henry Ford, and all of that. You know the data and the statistics out there. But it's because some people dare to challenge status quo. They dare to think that they could do something different. And I'm challenging everybody here. We got to stop thinking. I mean, I know there are a lot of pessimists out there, but we have to start thinking on how we engage through this transatlantic dialogue on issues on renewable energy. I think I've talked a lot. My colleagues are giving me the signal. I'm going to stop here.
But before you go, we have time for one question. The gentleman here actually flagged me a second ago, so if you could. Thanks.
Now, I would get the point that you said that you're in the middle age, right? You're in between. I teach at a university in Brazil, and we have 17, 19-year-olds. And we found out that the youth that is coming after you has two major challenges. They have no references and no heroes. And I think these issues are very important for the youth of a country to have people that they can look at. How do you plan to become that person?
I think I am already. But beyond that, beyond that, perhaps I should also emphasize that, and I think I said this or I put this on one of my questions throughout the day. Now, if you look at ISIS, you know, this whole, we call them terrorists or whatever, the people that are beheading folks in Iraq and co, those who recruit are young people. By the way, they are not uneducated. They're very educated young people. If you look at Boko Haram, the guy who is leading the folks and his lieutenants, they're not old people, they're young people. If you look at what's going on in Somalia, the piracy that's going on there, they're not old people, they are young, educated people. Let's even go to Mexico and Ecuador. Those who are involved in drug trafficking, they're not stupid people. They're young people who've educated themselves. Some of them come from very wealthy families, but the systems do not allow them the space to transform their talent into something productive for the country. And so their fallback position, of course, it's the lesser of the two evils. What is the lesser? It's all these things. So I agree with you entirely that mentorship and getting a role model is important. And that's why the emerging leaders you see here, and all of them spread out the room, we thought we could start that, we could be the generation that start changing the narrative. But we need you to be with us. We can't do it by ourselves. We need you to stop thinking we are angry, we are disillusioned, we are stupid. Start considering us as part of the solution and not the problem. Thank you.
Lamia?
Let me be honest. Thinking, or rather rethinking the Atlantic was quite a challenging endeavor for all of us. Influenced by models of other regions, we have tried sometimes to deny and even undermine our differences because we were looking for a common identity. What I would like to suggest to you today is to do the exact opposite. I would like us to build a model of a region that is not founded on commonalities, but rather on differences. Because diversity lies at the foundation of innovation and creativity, our differences that were previously depicted as an obstacle to our integration can be the very source of our power. For that purpose, technology offers us the opportunity and the unique timing to turn our Atlantic basin into a space where the best practices are shared between countries and the best ideas circulate among them. This is the timing for technology to offer us the opportunity once again for a paradigm shift for the development process, one that was conceived or misconceived as a monolithic linear process to one that is much more participatory and inclusive. Technology is the game changer. It enables governments and policymakers not only to access, but also incorporate new ideas, innovations, and devices in all sectors, from industry to education, health, and finance. Now, at the individual level, what we can see is that again, technology has completely and incredibly empowered our youth and our citizens in general. We can take, for instance, the case of entrepreneurs who can look for resources and funding through Indiegogo and Global Giving as an example. We can also look at social media, the power of blogging and trolling as what I would call new forms of cyber political power of the citizens. Actually, even you in the audience, if you take a step back, you will realize that tech and apps have not only transformed your lives and shifted your ways of learning, eating, and traveling, but it has created a new culture and also new landmarks for all of us. So in the Atlantic, I strongly believe that technology has to become our footprint. We have to commit to increase our connectivity. We have, starting from this initiative at the Atlantic Dialogue, to start using technology to make these kind of platforms not only an initiative, but the trend and then the rule. Now, all I have described so far are only aspirations. We are not there yet, but to get there, we can use it. We have to go through two important processes. The first one is capacity building. We really have to build states' capacity not only to absorb, but also to adapt to new technologies. We have also to help governments create enabling cyber environments for their citizens. And this entails basic infrastructure. Because, for instance, without electricity, you can't really use computers or mobile phones. And on that process, I just would like to say that I don't think that governments can do it alone. We need multi-sector intervention. We need you NGOs and you, the private sector, to work closely with the government and create partnerships and collaboration. And on that matter, I believe that OCP provides a very inspiring model of how the private sector can intervene in the education and be very, very powerful, not only in terms of financial resources, but in terms of resourcefulness, the ability to inject new ideas and maximize efficiency. The second thing we need to do, I think, is to empower us. But when I say empower us, there is a rationale behind. The first one is that creativity and risk-taking is what we do the best. The second thing that is very important is that when I talk about us youth, I'm not only talking about young emerging leaders who might have important opportunities in life. I'm talking about every single young man and every single young woman of the Atlantic, regardless of the fact that they live in urban or rural areas, or if they are from social backgrounds that are poor or rich, because we are at a time in which imagination is needed, and we need the input of our most creative thinkers, no matter where they are born and no matter which side of the Atlantic they come from.
So once again, if I could have one question there at the back.
I agree with you entirely about diversity and technology. The trouble is, most people in Europe of my generation are terrified of diversity and suspicious of technology. How do you propose winning over my generation to your vision?
That's a very good question, because technology is quite well related to the intergenerational gap. And I believe that the solution is really in trusting us. We need as kind of division of tasks in which you empower us and you include us in decision making. Because the problem today is that we're trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's tools, while we need actually to use tomorrow's tools to solve today's problems. And I think it's something that we can bring to you.
Great. And Nitika.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nitika Agarwal. I'm a senior policy advisor at Her Majesty's Treasury in London. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today to talk to you all on behalf of a wonderful and inspirational group of colleagues that I've met at the Emerging Leaders Cohort 2014. Can we please all give the whole group a round of applause? In true GMF style, I hope I can say that and not cause offense, I've been told to summarize a discussion I had with my colleagues about social contracts in 3 minutes. That, by the way, is a concept that has over 2,000 years of history associated with it. So I will try my best. Wish me luck. I'd like to start off with a quote. Please raise your hand if you've heard the following. Man was born free, but everywhere he is in chains. I would say that's a majority. Okay, so that's a quote from Rousseau, who is one of the founding philosophers of this idea of how society can come together and live peacefully together while a legitimate authority protects everyone's civil liberties. Now, I would like to share with you 3 thoughts we had about this concept. One is that this traditional idea of the social contract being between citizens and a state is too narrow. I've been to some amazing sessions over the last 3 days. One of them was about sustainable cities, and the poll that came from that the vote that we did there showed that one of the key players we thought, or the main player we thought was important to creating sustainable cities was the city, not the federal state. So there's scope for a concept of a social contract at a sub-state level, at a community-based level. I've also been to a really fascinating night owl discussion on diversity. And there the discussion was about how a cultural shift needs to happen in all of our organizations to ensure that they are inclusive, particularly with respect to gender. That takes more than legislation from the state. That takes a pact between every man and woman in each of our organizations to change that culture. There's room for a social contract at an organizational level. Equally, we've had discussions about economic inclusion. That seems to imply that we have some sense of moral obligation towards citizens beyond the borders of our nation states. Let's think about a social contract transatlantically, globally. So the point is there are multiple actors, not just citizens and the states, to which this concept of a social contract can be very pertinent. The second point I'd like to make is let's not think about the social contract only between people. What about the environment? Actually, we have a contract with Mother Earth, and we don't have one now, but we should. We've had really interesting discussions about sustainability, and we thought that thinking of the environment as a party to the social contract was a powerful way of mainstreaming sustainability in every single one of the policy discussions that we are having. And the third point that we came up with was, okay, so we've identified there are numerous actors, even non-state actors or parties, to what can be called a social contract. How do we go about making sure these numerous social contracts are built appropriately? And we came up with an overall framework, which was you need to make sure that for every specific issue we're looking to address, that the actors that are discussing those solutions and the level at which those solutions are being discussed are commensurate with that issue. problems we identified arise when people who will be affected by decisions are not included in the decision making. They are not the actors who are actually making the decisions, and the level at which that decision is being made does not allow them to be in touch with the people who will be affected. So, for example, when we speak of the democratic deficit in the EU, we're talking about the fact that the people who are affected by those everyday decisions do not feel party to those discussions. When we talk about the general public not being brought in to foreign direct investment, it's because there's a disenfranchised population. So that framework, we thought, was a powerful one in which to think about how we frame discussions and how we frame solutions about any particular issue we're looking at across the Atlantic. I hope those 3 points have given you some food for thought. I would like to think there's a reason I was asked to come up last on this particular issue, because actually this concept of a social contract is the framework for all cooperation. It is about the kind of governance and accountability structures that form the common understanding on which cooperation in any one of the spheres that my colleagues have spoken about apply. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. So, has anyone got one final question?
Thank you. If the environment, as you said, should be a party to the social contract, who would speak on its behalf?
I think we have a huge number of people in this room who do precisely that job. I can think of people within the cohort of emerging leaders who are sustainability analysts. I can think of people I've met at this conference who are agriculture specialists. There is a whole body of knowledge around what is sustainable, what isn't, how the environment should be preserved. So it is our job to make sure that expertise is brought in to every single one of the policy discussions we're having.
Great, thank you so much. So we've run over a little bit here, so apologies for that. But as Nitika said, there are 45 or so other emerging leaders who are sat among you now. So let's give a round of applause to those who are up here and those who are in the...